coached together for many, many years, and we coached often where some of you are still in that situation, but had very large teams with only one coach, and that coach did debate and did IEs and did everything, and Kitty definitely has done all of the above and has had much success with it. Many national qualifiers and different events and so forth. So, but what she's here specifically today is to talk to you about empowering your students so that you can survive, because you may have noticed how much of a turnover we have of coaches and how burnt out we can get. So because there was a time when we'd have 30 kids on our team and we were the only coach and we had to do all the different events. So if you have your kids doing 2 different events and you have 30 kids on your team, that's 60. That's like having 60 kids, with one coach. So anyway, today she's focusing on the interp side of things. And so Kitty Peck was a coach, drama teacher, speech teacher, and all of that. So thank you. And she at Riverton. So she still lives here, and she still judges for us, and she judges at our districts most every year. So thanks. If you would welcome Kitty Peck.
Well, let's see. Only a couple of old white-haired ladies. And that tells you how long that we've been involved. I retired going on 11 years ago now. And for the first 5 years, I didn't judge or have anything to do with speech. When I retired, I went to work for an oil field company, nasty, and I worked for 5 years. And then once I was able to have Medicare rather than insurance, I thought, I didn't learn to hate kids over 30 years, so I think I'll sub. So now I still substitute teach a lot. And I've found that as a sub, you can do subversive teaching, which is probably a really great thing for a coach, an ex-speech coach, because you can be really subversive. You don't have to put up with all the bureaucratic BS. You walk in, take the key, you read the lesson plan, you try to do what they ask. If there's no lesson plan, you wing it. When the bell rings at night, you walk back, give your key, you're gone. But you still can have an impact on kids. And I guess that is what I want to focus on a lot today, is that as a coach, you're a teacher. And things have changed so much since I started. And I was old when I started teaching. I was a young mother, had my first kid at 19, had 4 kids, didn't do any college. Finally decided after 11 years out of high school that I didn't really want to be attending bar when I was 60. So I went to college. I had competed in high school. How many of you competed in high school? Okay. So I had competed in high school, but in the 60s, when you are the class of 65, which I was, which will tell you how old I am, the events were way different. I did debate. I still communicate with my debate partner. I did drama. It was so much different then. And there was drama and poetry, and we didn't travel. And I was from Wisconsin, where Ripon is, NFL. But high school wasn't a big thing like it is and was when I was coaching. So I decided to go to college. And I'm a little bit eclectic because I'm a horse person. I rodeo and show horses. So I went to college and I competed in forensics. I did theater, because when you're a mother of 4, you got to gather scholarships. I sang in the school choir, and I rodeoed because I had a really good barrel horse. And so that was how I paid my way through the first 2 years at a junior college with 4 kids. And my mentor at that time was a lady named Joanne McFarland, who in Riverton then finally became the president of CWC and just retired here a year or so ago. But she was my first forensics coach in college. And So back then, as now, college kids don't have the luxury of picking one or two events. In college, I did oratory, expository, readers theater. I mean, they may have different names now. I did ADS, after dinner speaking. You had to be funny and write it yourself. I debated. I did extemp. You were expected to just do it, do everything. And I went to Phi Rho Pi Nationals, and really loved it. When I went, so that got me back into doing it. Plus, I was doing the plays. So when I went to the University of Wyoming to finish my degree, I traveled back and forth on the weekends because my kids were still back up in Riverton. Finally got a degree, and my first coaching job was at Shoshone. And I don't think they have a team now. And there were 2 kids that had done it with some teacher the year before. By the end of the year, we had, I think, 8 kids on the team. But I was waiting because I wanted a bigger program. Over my college years, I had helped with NFL districts. I had judged a lot as a college student, and I wanted a bigger program. And at that time, there was a lady in Riverton named Lois Sackman. And only the older people may even know who Lois is, but she's a legend. She's an NFL Hall of Fame person. She is a legend of speech in Wyoming. And I student taught for her. And the first thing that I did when I walked in to student teach for her before I took the Shoshone job, because she was old, but she wasn't ready to retire yet. And I walked in to the old high school at Riverton. First thing she did was hand me a script for each class, and I went and directed the 1-act plays in the stage on the gym. And she stayed in her room. So that was my first taste of actually being in charge. So then I got the Shoshone job. I did 1 year, and Lois decided to retire. And Lois wanted me to replace her. And Lois insisted that her replacement be able to do all the IEs and CX and do all of the events. And I could do that, and so she pushed for me to get the job, and so I got the Riverton job. And so over the time of Riverton High School's existence, there was Lois Sackman, and then there was me, and that was about 75 years worth. And then we went through a period after I retired where the program kind of went away, and that was a really sad time. But we've got a program back now and have had for several years that's excellent. And I'll talk a little bit about what can happen to you when you walk into a program that's been let die, because I'm sure it happened to Annette when she walked into Riverton. As I was a coach there, we would host 1 to 2 tournaments a year. Often we also hosted NFL. We hardly ever said no to anybody for things like that. We had a good judging pool at that time. And so we had a big program, held a lot of kids, and had success. State champions, sweepstakes, national qualifiers, I think, in every event over time. But we all had our events that we loved. And so I think one of the things that I want to talk about, how many of you are how many of you have coached, any first-year coaches here? No. Okay, 1. How many have coached 5 years or less? See, I thought there might be a bunch of you, okay? When you got to your program, was there a fully set up, wondrous library of interps and pieces and stuff that you just went to and did? Yeah, I was afraid that was probably not the case. When I retired, there was a lot of stuff in my room. We'd hosted a lot of tournaments. There was a judges list. There were interps. There were lots of scripts. There was everything you needed to do to make a tournament list to do. And I think I remember Annette saying none of that was there when she got there. And it took very few years for it to go away. Now, other coaches can help you a lot. But I will tell you right now that when it comes to interps, most of them are not going to give you their deepest, darkest secret piece that they've got saved for the perfect kid who comes along. I wouldn't. Not only that, those who have a really successful kid with a piece, they're not going to want that piece to even show its face for, to my mind, never. But at least a few years, 3 or 4 years. So people will help you with sources. They will try to be welcoming, but it's a competitive event. And so you still have to go out and look for things. Okay, so you're a relatively new coach and you call your first fall meeting and you got pizza and all the kids come into your room and immediately you hand them Macbeth and say, we're gonna cut this. Okay, what do your freshmen do? I mean, they come in, and you know speech kids. They're a little nerdy anyway. They're proud of it. They're proud of it. My kids always called themselves speech geeks, and they were proud of being speech geeks. Although, long years ago, we hosted our tournament, and it was called the Anarchy Invite. And my principal was really nervous about us having an anarchy invite. I think Lonnie remembers the anarchy invite probably. I know Peggy does. But my kids had looked up definitions of anarchy, and one of them is a peaceful. Anarchy doesn't have to be violent. And so my kids had t-shirts, and my principal thought that was just, I had one principal who thought that was just horrible. We were having the anarchy invite. And so we had to explain to him that if you look at the definitions, anarchy does not have to be violent, and that there is a peaceful type of anarchy, but it still bothered him. One of the things I expected my students to do, and I have several who have been successful coaches, have competed, are coaching at the high school or college level, and competed in college, my kids really were independent. They learned how to put on a tournament, I guarantee you. My kids did the tournament. They assigned the judges. We worked together doing things, but they knew how to get it done and run a speech tournament. So you invite the kids for pizza. If you've got an existing good program, you have a certain amount of experienced speech kids who may have a little bit of an attitude because that kind of develops. And then you have a whole bunch of little freshmen who are like, what do we do in this speech? You know? And the arrogance of the experienced kids doesn't always lend itself to the younger ones thinking they can possibly even end up doing well. And so what do you do? I want to throw it open and I want you guys to participate. What do you do to start getting kids looking for stuff they're going to do for interp? Whether it's duet or drama or humor, what do you do? Anybody?
I start with ones that are already pre-cut, that are already done, so they can just read through those and just like start getting the light bulb moments. And so then they go, well, can I do a book? Yes, you could do a book. So it's I just kind of let them see what a cutting is. It's already been pre-made, pre-done, everything. And then that way they just get the interp juices flowing so they have an idea of what they could do.
Okay. Anybody else? What do you do?
During our rush party, we take select videos from national finals, and we show that to our potential members, and it kind of sets the bar for them and lets them see what an exquisite performance looks like.
And they all freak out and quit.
Oh, no. They get up and they go, oh, I could do that, and it's like, absolutely, you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Then you introduce them to your library of interp pieces or whatever.
Right. Okay.
I also start with pre-cut pieces and I show them like what it looks like when it's cut down to time. But then I actually gear a conversation to each individual student to find out where their interests lie before I even go about locating a piece at all, because I would rather pick the right piece that that appeals to their interests and gives them a voice in where they want to use their voice, because that's the way I found to be most successful in retaining interest throughout an
Okay, and that's something I was gonna hit on down the road, is that, you know, you might have a really ambitious freshman, but we all know that high school kids only have a certain amount of life experience anyway. Some of them probably have more than we wish they had, but a freshman in high school cannot relate to every piece. And so even with the most talented kids, what I did was, as they developed, I would find a piece and I would think, man, as a junior, this kid could do this. But I wouldn't, if they found a piece that I thought a judge like me was gonna look at and go, they're polished, but man, they don't have any understanding of this. They don't have any empathy for the life experience that's gone into these characters. I would discourage them and tell them, this is for you older. And when I judge around, that happens often, that you'll see kids who are polished, but you know they just aren't mature enough to get it. Because there's some heavy duty material out there. And in speech, thankfully, you can do that kind of material. You can push the limits of material. But you can, as a judge, I can tell by watching generally if a kid gets it. Even if they're super polished, if there's no empathy and no feeling, then I just, you know, it's really hard for me to love them doing that piece. And I will think, boy, I wish they'd done it next year or the year after. So I think that's something that, as young coaches, because you'll have kids, they'll watch movies, and movies are hard, and having them watch videos, there are pitfalls to that, and to watching movies, in that what you have in front of you is a performance, and they can mimic it. But to me, mimicking is not learning. And so you've got to make them make that piece their own. And I am hardcore, and I know that it's so easy now with technology has changed the world of forensics. And I know you can go online, and I know you can buy pieces that are already cut. You can even get people to write pieces and publish them for your individual kid. And I'm much happier when I see a kid get up and go, and their intro leads me into a line in winter, rather than a piece that when I listen to it, I know it's just been purchased. Good material is really important. And because I think that coaching is teaching, I think it's so important for you to make those kids find stuff. And that doesn't mean you can't help them. I mean, I read all the time for kids, but I didn't cut for kids. And they'd all want an intro, and I'd say, well, you write an intro and then we'll work on it. Because intros are that hook. And sometimes when you're pushed with a lot of kids, it's just so easy to just grab one out of the milk carton box and go, here, so-and-so did this 2 years ago, do it. But in speech, you do have to be careful, because there are old bats like me around who have seen kids doing it for years, and they saw that kid 2 years ago, and then you're like, okay, they're not doing it, they're either mimicking that kid or their performance isn't nearly as strong as that kid, and it can hurt them. You know, if I saw a kid do it 2 years ago that was just astonishing, and then you give it to him again in 2 years, and I judge him at NFL, and it's not that astonishing, sometimes, even though you want to separate it and say, okay, it's this person, you've still got it stuck in your mind. I mean, I remember the very first drama piece I had as a state champion in Wyoming, and it was The Elephant Man. And it was a piece that I have seldom seen. And back when that kid did it, you couldn't move, you couldn't walk, you couldn't, I mean, he stood there and from here up had to become the Elephant Man. And that was the very first state championship I won. Now I think about that piece and I go, whoa, you could do a lot now with that piece. that he had to do with a little bit of gesturing and face and body tension and all of that. So I think that looking for new pieces is always the bane of speech coaches, trying to find something that somebody in another school didn't succeed with last year. You know, the days of Patrick F. McManus and all the humors is long gone, but I would tell you that there could be a freshman boy who loves his hunting, and Patrick F. McManus could work great for him, because it's still fun. You know, so one thing I also wanted to stress to you is don't be afraid to take something old and make it new again. You know, I never did the Elephant Man again in 30 years. I had one kid do it. He won state with it. I never pulled it out again. And we talked about it, but it just, I guess, never exactly the right kid. I don't know. But I think that we have to look at those kinds of things of trying to make the kids go out and look and read. Now, one of the things I do, and I didn't bring a whole bunch of crap because I didn't want to lug it, but over the years, I just grabbed a few off my shelf at home. One of the places that I like, because I really like good writers. So when I'm out looking, and it's so easy now because you can go on Amazon, you can go places, you can find all kinds of stuff. But when you can tell by looking, I've had these a while. But like Sam Shepard, okay, just died, love Sam Shepard. Here are two books that I found, I think, on a sale bookshelf. And they're all short plays. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plays in this book. Now tell me how much easier it is to cut a short play by a good writer than to cut a full-length play by a good writer. This too. He's got 1, 2, 3. A lot of these really good playwrights, they wrote lots of littler stuff. That doesn't mean they don't work. And boy, to have a kid try to cut a full-length play is really tough. This one, this guy won the Academy Award for writing Moonstruck. And this is a book of 13 short plays. Now, I would much rather look here for a good piece than I would to go in the French's catalog and go to the juvenile plays and buy a little thin juvenile play. Because I don't think those things compete really well. I just think they aren't good enough material. And material is just so important. I also always haunted short story collections. About 1 million of them put out every year. Lots of them published with lots of writers. Some of them aren't great, some of them are really awesome. But a short story, there again, so much easier to start cutting on a short story. So much easier to get a kid to read it, you know, than trying to get them to read a whole novel and then go, okay, well, there's an exciting part at the end and there's an exciting part in the middle, and how do I put that together? Now, maybe as they mature, they may figure out how to do that, and I've done it, and you may have done it if you've competed, and you may have done it as a coach. But I'll tell you what, it's hard to pull the parts from a novel to make a piece that will work and put it together and get transitions written and just make it work and be competitive. So I think that you have to be open to looking for those kinds of things. And these are the kind of things that you'd never see on a bestseller list, ever. You know, who knows that there's a book out there with 6 of Sam Shepard's plays in it, in one book, in one collection. Now, I realize, and I did run off like 4 little things, but you guys can all do this. Computers were in my life before I retired, but they weren't very in our life. And there weren't computers in rounds, but you knew it was coming. And so I ran off 4 things, and you can take them or not, but that you all have access to them. But you can go in and look for anything, and those are just, have some lists of pieces. One of them's from a high school of where they go look for pieces. Some of them, I mean, they're available, and you can pick one up if you want one, and if you don't, you don't, because you can look them up online too. And there were tons more, and you know that. You've probably been out there looking. But I thought I'd bring at least, in case it was like a first-year person who absolutely had nothing to start with. There's a list there, and you can kind of go with it. Okay, when you start with your program and you've got those young kids, how do you use your older kids to help get them to the competitive stage?
We take and match all of our novices with a varsity member in the same event if possible. And then those people spend some time talking about the event, what to expect in rounds. And then when that varsity member is practicing their piece, the novice person is there to watch to kind of see how that goes. And then we try to keep them kind of paired up, at least for the first half of the season, so that they can kind of encourage that younger person until they get comfortable with the process.
That's a good suggestion, yeah. Peggy?
You know, somebody said I haven't watched the Nationals video, and your reaction was sort of like mine, is then they get really intimidated because those people are so good and they're just way out there. But if you can videotape some of your better varsity kids and show those to the new kids, that's a lot less intimidating. And in fact, you could even get some volunteers from your team to be bad and have the kids talk about why is this one better and this one is not as good, strengths and weaknesses. But if you can use the videotaping of your own students, or maybe some of the other kids around Wyoming that you have access to videotape to watch in certain events, I think that's a lot less intimidating than
Well,
watching
and your experienced kids, they're all hams anyway.
Yeah.
And so they're more than willing to drag out an old piece and do it. And then you can critique it, and you can talk about it, and you can start teaching those kids by doing it. I guess I want to discourage the younger coaches from going and buying the pieces and just handing them to the kids. And I know that works, and I know there are pieces, and I know that kids win with them because that just happens, and they're super polished. But I think as teachers, there's just so much more to it. And I know that nowadays when they spend all of their life on their phones, that it's hard to pull them, push them, drag them through reading novels, reading plays, reading short stories. I know Annette does things with with just getting them to read and learn how to read a play. The activity where you have 2 scripts, and you've all probably done it, and everybody's reading a different line in a row from different scripts, but trying to make it make sense. You know, when young kids who haven't read plays start trying to read a play, they let all the stage direction get in their way. And so it's hard for them to see how that works into an interp. But don't be afraid to let them play silly things like everybody grab a script and then everybody just read alternate lines, but you've got to try to make it make sense, and you've got to make it sound like it's the same conversation. And they really can learn from doing those kinds of activities, those kinds of funny things. If the teaching isn't happening, then I think that the coaching isn't worth anything. And I know from experience, because one of the things that social media has done is to allow me to get back in touch with so many of my former students who competed. I'm in touch with the Elephant Man, who's now 52 years old. And he also is a musician, and he was a presidential scholar too, but he didn't do much with that. He's a great musician, But what he does is in Virginia City, Montana, he lives in Missoula, and in the summer he directs the Virginia City Players, and he writes the music and the scores and the scripts, and he spends his summer up there directing and acting and playing music and all of that with the Virginia City Players in Montana. So don't think your kids, when you're an oldie like me, you know where they've gone. And man, they are good. They turn out good. And so what they learn, they use. And they use it whether they're an attorney who worked for the for Colorado Attorney General when they were legalizing pot and was in on all of that. They're still using their speech skills. And I think as a coach, you want to sell that to them. That this is maybe, my kids will communicate to me that their speech experience was the most important thing that they did in their life. It had more impact on them than any individual class that they ever took. Whether they're a doctor or, I mean, they turn out to be all kinds of things, but they will tell you that that is the most important thing that they ever did, was their speech experience. So I guess I want to, just really stress, try to work to cut it. If you're not really experienced and you weren't a competitor, learning to cut is not an easy thing. And you may have to work on it a while. And if you're doing humor, and Annette and I had this discussion, it is so hard because if you actually make people laugh, all of a sudden your time becomes an issue. And I personally don't like to dock kids if I'm laughing, but there are judges who will. And so you need to, on pieces, it's hard. Sometimes you get to the point where the last line or two that's going to make it fit and work with the laughs is hard. I've even gone back and recut a piece totally. Helped a kid look at the piece totally different and recut it. And so, I think that as someone, if you didn't do speech and you didn't learn to cut, it's not an easy skill to learn to do. I find that as a sub, kids nowadays don't want to read. It's really hard. And I'm sure that even the bright kids aren't reading like they used to. So I think that activities with plays, if you're going to try to cut a play, getting them to read plays and not, just fire the lines and get that done, because they don't. I've had high school seniors tell me that they got through high school without reading a book, without completely reading a book. And they find a way to get through. So that's why I suggest things like short plays, short stories. It's a good place to start with kids. And I would always rather start them with a little better material. But Sam Shepard's not probably for every freshman. Buried Child is not a freshman piece. So I think you do have to adjust, and you do have to buy some things that will work. But I love going to people like David Mamet. Writes great dialogue. I don't even know if this piece would work now, but it was really successful years ago when we did it. But now they move so much in duet. And we had a piece, and Peggy might remember it, called Duck Variations of David Mamet. And it's two old men sitting on a park bench. And they're crotchety old men. I don't know if it would work now because they don't move much because they're old men sitting on a bench. But it's hysterically funny. And and kids did really, really well with it. But that's a little short piece by a great writer. And so I like to look at David Mamet, I like to look at Sam Shepard. I was watching a movie the other day. I don't think I've ever seen a piece done of it. Glengarry Glen Ross. It's a David Mamet. There's a script. Great duets in there for like two boys. I mean, it's mostly men. But I was watching the movie, and I'm, I've been retired a long time, but I still look at it and go, oh God, there's a piece in there. There's a piece in there. Long years ago, and now it's much easier to find scripts, to find things published. Sometimes we would see something that we really wanted to do, and we couldn't find it published. We wanted to do a piece called Closet Land from a movie one time, and it is just a super dramatic, intense piece. Well, last year I looked. It was done on Broadway, so now there's a script. And it's a man and a woman. But, so I think that don't minimize your quality just to find something easy for kids to do. And I think that's the best way to teach them, is have them read a lot, even if you have to sit and read with them and have bunches of them in your room reading, because they may not do it on their own. They may not be really successful at doing that. And I really, really want to stress that while technology's been wonderful, I don't think everything from it has been good. When you start to perform it, polish is really important. The kids now, I'm just amazed when I go to judge how polished they all are. Sometimes too. Sometimes so polished that it's like bam, 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 bam. And I'm like, wait, give me a second. Let me think about what these people are doing in this piece. And they just are firing through it, and I realize part of it's time. You're trying to get the piece in, you're trying to get that done. But and maybe it's not as important with lay judges, I don't know, I think they like those super polished pieces, but if it's funny, give me a chance to laugh. And if you have to cut the piece more, cut it more. Because I feel really guilty if I start to laugh and you're on to the next line and you're just running over me, then all of a sudden I find myself sitting there just kind of chuckling and smiling. And I would much rather, as a judge with a sense of humor, sit and laugh and have time to laugh. And the same in drama, give me time to think about if something's going on intensely in these people's life, give me time to think about that happening. I mean, in our life, we don't just go blah, 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 through. I mean, and sometimes when I'm watching pieces now, because they are so just absolutely polished and smooth, just because it's a quiet space doesn't mean it's an empty space. And I think in drama and humor, allow your audience, which is the most important one, is your judge, to get that feeling. Another thing, and this is not interp, but you've all judged, if you've judged it all, you've judged extemp, where the speech is happening and you're watching extemp, and then there's 1, 2, 3, and then there's a little bit more talk, and then there's 1, 2, 3, and then there's a little bit more talk, and then there's 1, 2, 3, and then there's a little bit more talk. It can get almost the same way in interp, because you're allowed a ton of movement now. And even though I retired before it was really getting there, I knew it was coming, so when I came back and started judging, I didn't like fall out of my chair when it happened. I just went, this is coming, this is what it's doing. Because I grew up and I competed where you were in a box and you could do things with your body and often you had a script in your hand, and you didn't turn around to your partner, you didn't sing, you didn't move. But things had changed over all the years I coached, and I knew where they were going. I knew it had gone that way in college quite a long time ago. And so, I mean, I knew that that was happening. But it happens kind of like the 1, 2, 3 extemp. If I'm sitting watching a piece, and in my head, all of a sudden, it's clicking, well, they're gonna move now. Pretty quick here, it's coming. Then I don't think you want, yes, they gotta know what they're doing, but you wanna try to keep it spontaneous or looking spontaneous. You want the kids to feel the piece, to make the judge have that empathy for those characters. I think you can, even with all the movement that you do, over choreograph. So that it is so choreographed. Like I said, if in my brain I start thinking ahead and going, okay, this is gonna be the next thing that happens, then that's not effective to me. I still like to be a little bit surprised in there. I still like them to look natural, not like they're just rote. I've got this memorized, I'm going really fast, I've got 10 minutes. I want to feel. And I know that's hard with kids sometimes because they don't always get it. But the timing is important, I know that. You know, if you ever have me for a judge and your humor runs over because I'm laughing, I won't hurt them. But I know people do. I know people do. I know judges do. But I think you've got to allow not only time for humor, but time for pain, time for feeling, time for dramatic thought in those pieces. And it's hard to fit them in and to cut them and make them work, but I think you'll have much more impact if you can get your kids to do that. To me, that's just, I mean, there are pieces where the tears just run down my face. I'm an easy audience if you're good. I always have been an easy laugher. I always have been an easy crier. But if I sit through a round of semi-humor and I have to smile at them, I'm like, okay, you're real polished, but why am I only smiling? Because I'm a loud laugher. I'm allowed everything. I'm a speech kid. But same with drama. If they can make me cry, just naturally, just run down out of my eyes, often it's not the fastest, smoothest delivery. It's someone who's feeling something. They're feeling that piece. Anyway, anything you want to contribute or add? We're getting close to the end. I've this old lady up here babbling at you, and you can use, hopefully something you can use, hopefully something that you don't just tell your kids outside the room, look, that white-haired lady, I heard her talk. She's not really a lay judge, she looks like one, but do this. Something that you can use, I hope, you know, that will add something for you. I did this a long time. I loved it. It's one of the most important things you can do with kids. And if these things I ran off, they're nothing special, they just have a few little lists on them, you can all find them. I could have run off tons more, but I subbed in my old high school and I just stole the paper and made copies. They don't care. I'm kind of a fixture around there. Half the teachers are my former students. So, anything you'd like to ask, anything you'd like to contribute about your program, I think that what you're doing is just the most wonderful thing and exciting for kids. I found it that way, dragging 30, 40 kids around the countryside and doing it for a lot of years. And I know there's a huge turnover, and the turnover is because it is hard to do this. The stress is heavy. There's a lot of work to it. and nobody in your school understands what you do. They don't. They don't have a clue. And if you host a tournament, they don't know why you need all the rooms. And they don't, I mean, my activities directors, I had good ones, I had horrible ones, but we hosted a lot of tournaments over the years. And so I just want to stress to you younger coaches, if you're competitors, you know how great it is. If you weren't really an avid competitor and you kind of got handed a program, believe me, it's worth learning how to do it. It is valuable to kids. And, you know, 30, 40 years from now, your kids will still be getting with you on whatever it is then, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever. It'll be something different. But anyway, so that's all I really have for you.
Thank you.